Western movies look rugged on screen, but behind the camera things were far uglier. Horses were killed for stunts, actors nearly decapitated during botched setups, and entire studios went bankrupt. Even legends like Marilyn Monroe, Steve McQueen, and Clint Eastwood got dragged into behind-the-scenes scandals. These are 10 famous Westerns that were absolute disasters behind the scenes. Major Dundee is what happens when a director completely loses control and the studio panics. Sam Peckinpah's first big Civil War Western was supposed to be a straightforward job, but shooting in Mexico everything went sideways. Peckinpah was drunk most days, picking fights with the crew and firing people for nothing. Charlton Heston got so fed up he actually threatened Peckinpah with a cavalry saber on set in front of everyone to try and get him in line. Not something you see every day. The project went way over budget, weeks behind schedule, and the studio started freaking out. Columbia slashed the shooting schedule, tried to kick Peckinpah off the film, and Heston ended up giving up his entire salary just to keep the director on board. In the end, the studio still took the movie away from Peckinpah, chopped it down in editing, and put out a version that barely made sense. Peckinpah disowned it completely, later calling Major Dundee one of the most painful things that ever happened in my life. Years later, he still called it maybe the best thing he'd ever made, just not the version anybody ever saw. The whole shoot was a nightmare for everyone involved. Jesse James might look like your standard old-school Western, but its real claim to fame is a scandal that changed Hollywood forever. During filming, the crew blindfolded a horse and sent it straight off a 70-foot cliff into a river. The stuntman survived, the horse didn't, and the public was furious. The outcry was so big, the studios had to get the American Humane Association involved in monitoring animal safety on set. That's how we ended up with the "No animals were harmed" line you see in credits now. Historical accuracy went out the window, but audiences didn't seem to care. The movie was a massive hit. Third highest grossing film of 1939 behind Gone with the Wind and Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. On screen, The Magnificent Seven is all about teamwork and camaraderie, but off-camera it was the opposite. You had Yul Brynner and Steve McQueen locked in an ego battle from day one. McQueen took one look at his script, saw he only had 7 lines, and immediately started pulling stunts to get more attention, flipping coins, rattling his shotgun shells, anything to steal focus from Brynner during his scenes. It went way past professional rivalry. McQueen got so aggressive about it that he'd literally kick away the mound of dirt Brynner was using to look taller just to mess with him. At one point, Brynner finally snapped and grabbed McQueen in front of everyone. According to co-star Robert Vaughn, the whole set turned sour. McQueen's need to one-up everyone else turned every day into a competition. The only reason the movie holds together on screen is because the director, John Sturges, tried to placate McQueen by giving him some say behind the camera, which McQueen just used to keep stirring the pot. The feud nearly derailed the whole film. It's a classic now, but if you knew what was happening behind the scenes, it's honestly a miracle it got finished at all. The Misfits was pure tragedy from the jump. Marilyn Monroe and Montgomery Clift were both deep into their own battles with addiction, and director John Huston's gambling binges and all-night drinking didn't help. Filming in the Nevada desert was grueling. Temperatures over 100 degrees, production falling behind, and nobody sleeping. Arthur Miller, Monroe's husband, kept rewriting the script as their marriage fell apart. Monroe was in and out of the hospital for exhaustion and depression, and the stress just kept piling up. Montgomery Clift wasn't doing much better, still recovering from a near-fatal car crash. Clark Gable, already dealing with health problems, insisted on doing his own stunts, and after filming Wrapped, he suffered a heart attack and died within 2 weeks. Monroe herself died a year later. Her role in The Misfits is now seen as one of her best, but at the time, she hated it. And the finished film bombed at the box office, earning just a bit more than its $4 million budget. This movie started with a mountain of script drafts. Sam Peckinpah wrote one, Stanley Kubrick was supposed to direct but left just before shooting. Brando took over despite never having directed anything before, and that's when things really went off the rails. Brando became obsessed with getting every little detail perfect. He shot endless takes, burned through money, and at one point spent days filming nothing but waves on the beach. After months of shooting, he ended up with a nearly 5-hour cut, then spent another 6 months editing it. Paramount took one look, freaked out, and seized the film. They chopped it down and released a version Brando immediately disowned. For all that, One-Eyed Jack still managed to be a hit at the box office, but Brando never directed again. It's got a reputation now as a weird, fascinating misfire. Quentin Tarantino calls it one of his favorite westerns, and Martin Scorsese was behind its restoration for the New York Film Festival in 2016. For everyone involved, though, it was a production nightmare. Even Sam Peckinpah, who got fired after 3 weeks, grumbled that there were only 2 scenes of mine in the picture and I did not receive credit for it. On screen, Sergio Leone's classic looks effortless. Behind the camera, though, the set was basically a minefield. Safety rules were almost non-existent, and the result was a string of near-deadly accidents. Eli Wallach has told some wild stories about what he survived here. At one point, a crew member put a bottle of acid next to his soda by mistake. Wallach took a swig, ended up in the hospital getting his stomach pumped. That alone could have ended the shoot, but it didn't stop there. They tied Wallach's hands for a scene, put him on a nervous horse, and fired off a fake gunshot. The horse took off, ran for about a mile, and Wallach had no way to get free. One wrong move and he's done. Then there's the train sequence. He's lying next to the tracks for a stunt, not realizing the train cars have these metal steps sticking out. If he'd raised his head even an inch, he'd have been decapitated. And Clint Eastwood had his own brush with disaster during an explosives gag. The shoot was packed with moments like that, just people getting through it by pure luck. Pat Garrett and Billy the Kid is one of those productions that's almost as dramatic as the movie itself. Sam Peckinpah was in charge, James Coburn and Chris Christopherson were the leads, and from day one, the set was a battleground. Peckinpah was deep into his drinking and fighting with MGM over every decision. Scripts, budget, you name it. He'd show up drunk, argue with everyone, stall the schedule, and push the budget higher every day. Eventually, the studio just locked him out of the editing room, cut 20 minutes out, and dumped their version in theaters. The movie tanked. Critics hated the choppy editing and it made no money. Peckinpah's reputation took a hit that lasted for years. Only after later restorations did the film get some respect. This one almost fell apart before it even really started. Philip Kaufman was the original director, but things soured with Clint Eastwood almost immediately. Eastwood didn't like Kaufman's slow style or his decisions on set, and it all came to a head after a couple weeks of shooting. He pulled rank, got Kaufman fired, and took over directing himself. The Directors Guild fined the production, and after this incident, they created a rule, still known as the Eastwood Rule, to keep actors from firing their directors and taking over. Even with all the mess behind the scenes, the film managed to get finished. There were a lot of hard feelings, though. Cast and crew felt Kaufman deserved credit for much of the groundwork. He picked the locations, the costumes, even cast Chief Dan George after seeing him in Little Big Man. The film itself is still considered one of Eastwood's best as both director and star. It's a revisionist Western, praised especially by Native American viewers for its more honest depiction. Orson Welles was a fan. He reportedly watched it several times in theaters. And Eastwood has said that even with all his accolades, Josey Wales is the one fans still talk to him about most. Nothing says Hollywood disaster quite like Heaven's Gate. Michael Cimino had just won the Oscar for The Deer Hunter, so the studio gave him a blank check, and he spent it, and then some. The movie blew through its budget, went tens of millions over, and Cimino was famous for doing take after take, rebuilding sets, and dragging the schedule out for months. The chaos went beyond money. Real animals suffered for this film. Cockfights staged for the camera, chickens killed, cows bled out for realism, and even a horse blown up with dynamite. The Humane Association organized a boycott, and after this, new rules for animal safety in movies were put in place. When Heaven's Gate finally made it to theaters, it bombed so hard that United Artists pulled it after just a week. The film was savaged by critics and ignored by audiences. The studio itself went bankrupt. That's how big the fallout was. Chris Christopherson summed it up years later like this: "It was a really beautiful film that got clobbered. It was so long a production that there was plenty of time to get down on Michael Cimino." Tombstone became a classic, but the road to the screen was rough. Kevin Jarrah wrote the script and was hired to direct, but things went off the rails almost immediately. He fell behind schedule and clashed with the cast, leading to his firing early in production. George Cosmatos was brought in as the new director, but rumors still fly that Kurt Russell actually directed a big chunk of the film behind the scenes to keep things moving. The set was in constant turmoil. Crews came and went, scenes were rewritten on the fly, and the whole project almost shut down. In the end, they pulled it together and the film was a hit, but that was pure luck. Surviving production on Tombstone was almost as tough as the gunfights in the movie itself.